Hello, everyone. It's Carlo Bellini here. I am going to deconstruct 2 minutes of the Elon Musk BBC interview to highlight practical tools and tips which you can implement to improve your communication techniques and make you a more effective communicator. I'm going to look at what Elon does masterfully, what the BBC journalist does extremely poorly, and then what are those principles that you can take away. Let's start with looking at a crescendo moment in the interview.
That's a false.
No, what I claimed,
You just lied.
What I claimed was.
So let's look now at the 2 minutes preceding this point where Elon Musk calls out the BBC journalist for lying and unpack what he does to lead to this point.
I would only just add that, we have spoken to people who have been sacked that used to be in content moderation. And we've spoken to people very recently who were involved in moderation. And they just say, there's not enough people to police this stuff.
So first part that the BBC journalist does very, very poorly is the use of we have spoken to people and they say. It is entirely vague, non-specific. It's an incredibly weak point. When you think of constructing an argument and you use generalities like we, people, and they, it puts you on the back foot right from the outset because you can be challenged on, well, firstly, who is we, who are these people, and who is they? You might hear it, and people use this really, really commonly in their language where they say that you can drink carrot juice to lose weight. They say that walking improves your health. They say that smoking isn't bad for you. It's a very, very common argument that is quite weak because when you deconstruct and you actually ask, well, who is they? It's very difficult to define. It's really difficult to do that. The BBC journalist, by doing this, puts these generalities together and positions it for Elon to challenge and ask some questions. I would suggest that the counter way to say it is something like, I, rather than we, have spoken to two former executives from Twitter who have said there's been a 56% reduction in monitoring staff at the company. What can you say about how that has had an impact on the effectiveness of monitoring hate speech? See, this reframe makes it significantly more effective and more tangible.
Particularly around hate speech in the company.
What hate speech are you talking about? I mean, you use Twitter.
Right.
Do you see a rise in hate speech?
Elon here is rather neutral, curious tone. The first part is he establishes that the journalist uses Twitter, a really innocuous comment. Of course he uses Twitter. He's interviewing him about Twitter. So he says, you use Twitter, right? Journalist absolutely agrees. Do you see a rise in hate speech? It's a simple question, but yet it is a binary yes or no answer. Positions him to do that.
But just a personal anecdote, like what do you? I don't.
Then he gives him the opportunity to just a personal anecdote. I don't even need you to commit to a position. I just would like to understand you personally. What's just some of the stories that you've got there? You see how disarming those questions, framing from Elon are? They're curious. They're relatively neutral. They're intriguing. He's not coming angrily. He's not coming really strongly, assertively. From his curious tone, it allows the journalist to talk more freely.
Certainly, for you, I would see I get more of that kind of content, personally. But I'm not going to talk to the rest of for the rest of Twitter.
So you see more hate speech personally?
I would say I would see more hateful content in that.
So then he reiterates and reframes, takes back what the journalist says, and he says, so you see more hate content personally. Again, this goes to a binary yes or no, positioning the journalist to agree with him or disagree with him.
Content you don't like or hateful? What do you mean to describe a hateful thing?
This is a masterful element of what Elon does. The journalist bumbles a little bit, and rather than having a position in terms of yes or no or being clear, starts using a lot of different words. And then Elon gives him the opportunity just to describe what you'd say hateful. Again, he's not angry. He is not being too assertive. He's not being confrontational. It's all from a place of curiosity. With this, curiosity becomes very disarming. Describe to me what is hateful.
Yeah, I mean, just content that will...
Yeah, The journalist is speaking in colloquialisms. It doesn't command any gravitas First part, he's increased throughout the interview. If you notice, the rate of his speech increases. He's using more words per time unit than Elon. Elon uses less words more effectively. Journalist uses more words that are like filler words that aren't particularly useful or convey anything particularly meaning. Yeah, doesn't command authority, doesn't command gravitas, doesn't command that I actually know what I'm talking about.
Solicit a reaction, something that may include something that is slightly racist or slightly sexist, those kinds of things.
So you think if something is slightly sexist, it should be banned?
Elon here makes a logical leap where he positions the journalist to ask him to describe hateful speech. The journalist says something slightly sexist, slightly racist, and then Elon makes a logical assertion where he says, so if you think something is slightly sexist or racist, it should be banned. You see now this pattern where Elon is alternating between open questions, describe what you mean by hateful, and questions that force the journalist to take a position as, yes, I agree with you, or no, I disagree with you, where he has to commit. In this one, he says, in a bit of a far-reaching statement, if you think it's something slightly sexist or slightly racist, it should be banned.
No,
Is that what you're saying?
I'm not saying anything. I'm
just curious.
The journalist then says, I'm not saying anything. What are you saying then? You're using your words, you're using your mouth, you're talking, but you're actually not saying anything. You're reducing your credibility as this interview goes on by using filler words, generalities, vagueness, and that I'm not actually saying anything in response to a direct question.
I'm trying to understand what you mean by hateful content. And I'm asking for specific examples. And you just said that if something is slightly sexist, that's hateful content. Does that mean that it should be banned?
Well, you've asked me whether my feed, whether it's got less or more. I'd say it's got slightly more.
That's why I'm asking for examples. Can you name one example?
Elon here takes the curious element. He says, I'm just really trying to understand what you're saying. And I've suggested this. I've asked you this question to describe it. You've described it. And now I'm seeking to understand that further, and that should be banned. You have not given me a position here. Can you give me an example? Examples are always really, really useful when you're having a discussion. So if we go back to the start of what I was saying, the generalities are, we believe, we have spoken to people and they think. Generalities. When you have that, say, give me an example. It's a really, really effective communication skill around trying to get to something in detail, because we can discuss granularity and we can actually get into specifics and go from that high level to that detail. I encourage you, as when you're sharing your story, when you're sharing your opinions, always have at least 3 examples. If you're going for a job interview, which is a great example of this, people will say, give me an example when you were a leader. Give me an example where you were in a confrontational situation. Give me an example of something that you struck with adversity. People often practice one example, and the way that you talk about that, if you really have lived it, if you've been a practitioner, you can talk about in detail anything because you've actually lived it. It's not made up. It's not fabricated. I always encourage people to have 3 examples as a minimum. Because why? It shows that you have actually lived it. It shows that you understand what is being going on and you can share those stories. In this journalist interview, he can't even come up with one.
Honestly, I
you can't name a single example.
I'll tell you why, because I don't actually use that for you, feeder.
Okay, so I can't tell you one because I actually don't use the feature that I'm telling you is contributing, and there's a lot of hateful speech. The journalist previously said in the interview that he's using it, and now he said that his credibility as we go progressively through this interview is decreasing significantly.
Because I just don't particularly like it.
But you
said a lot of people are quite similar. I only look at
a lot of people are quite similar. Another generality. Who are these people? How are they similar? You share no data. You share no information about how you got that. It automatically creates doubt in the listener's mind. Elon's mind, he's ticking over. Elon understands the company incredibly well, and he's hearing these generalities, and all it is creating doubt in your position.
You said you've seen more hateful content, but you can't name a single example, not even one.
Elon here, he takes what the journalist says. It's communication technique. You said X, but you can't name a single example of X. He's positioning him in logical conversational chess. Whereas if you're going to tell me X and you see X, you must logically have seen it. Otherwise, it immediately commands doubt on your position.
Sure, I've used that feed for the last 3 or 4 weeks, and
well, then how did you see the hateful content?
Because I've been using Twitter since you've taken it over for the last 6 months.
Okay, so then you must have at some point seen the hateful content. I'm asking for one example.
Right.
And you can't give a single one.
And I'm saying...
I say so that you don't know what you're talking about.
Really?
Yes, because you can't give me a single example of hateful content, not even one tweet. And yet you claimed that the hateful content was high.
Well,
that's a false.
No, what I claimed...
You just lied.
What I claimed was...
So, a few things here. First part, Elon, incredibly clear, concise, succinct, logical flow of words. They're straightforward, they sink. We all can follow it. We can all see how this completely unpacks everything and unpacks the journalist argument. The journalist keeps responding with generalities. The one thing the journalist could have said as a alternative to the way that he responded with vagueness, generalities, confabulation, trying to find different words is, Elon, I don't have an example to give you at the moment. And perhaps that is a possibility that shows that there hasn't been the hateful speech. Can you share with me the data that you have at Twitter on hateful speech and how much has it reduced or increased under your stewardship? There's an element here when to convey gravitas, to convey authority, to increase the amount of trust is actually admitting what you don't know. Admit what you don't know, take it back rather than, as he does, always trying to cover up. He gets a sense that this person is not trustworthy.
There are many organizations that say that kind of information is on the rise. Now,
there are many organizations that say that kind of information is on the rise. Yet again, generalities, no specifics, no data, no credibility in terms of what he's referring to, and Elon's checkmated him at this point.
And whether it has on my
feed or example.
Not, I mean, right, and
literally
you look at something like the Strategic Dialogue Institute in the UK. They will say that. So
look, people will say all sorts of nonsense. I'm literally asking for a single example. You can't.
Elon knows at this point that he's absolutely got him because he's just hammering home this point about give me one single example, which as a listener sounds entirely reasonable that you should be able to give one single example of the issue that you're raising contention with.
Right. And as I already said, I don't use that feed. But
then how would you know?
I don't think this is getting anywhere.
You literally said you experienced more hateful content and then couldn't name a single example.
Right. And as I said,
that's absurd.
I haven't actually looked at that feed.
Then how would you know this hateful content?
Because
what Elon does really, really well here is a technique that I'll call bottom lining, where he takes a particular point and then he uses very, very few words, brevity to express the clarity of his point. You can't name a single example. That is absurd. That is a false. You are lying. All examples where he doesn't say, the journalist would, if he was in Elon's situation, would probably say something like, it seems to me that when I look at the words that you're saying and the questions that you're raising, that you're probably lying in this. He doesn't say that at all. He says, you are lying. That is absurd. The brevity commands authority. And he does this throughout. If you listen to the way that he talks in this interview, the questions are relatively short, punchy, to the point. Describe to me what hateful speech is, curious tone. The tone here is more authoritative, where he's pushing back with succinctness and clarity and making a particular point to the journalist.
That's what I saw a few weeks ago. I can't give you an exact example. Let's move on. We only have a certain amount of time.
The journalist here is let's move on, trying to move on with the interview for obvious reasons without actually conceding that he's lost in this argument. You'll also notice throughout the whole interview, if you rewatch these last 2 minutes, Elon engaged, direct eye contact with the journalist, sitting up straight. There's a lot of time that he's nodding, reaching out really through his body language, conveying to the journalist, I'm curious, I want to understand more. If you look at the journalist here, the way he is, slunched over, head down, increased rate of speech, The words that he uses are much more frequent, higher in number. It's something there that it doesn't command the authority. It doesn't command that I know what I'm talking about. It comes across as like I am covering up something. So if we wrap all of these things together, what are the things that Elon does masterfully? The first is lead from a position of curiosity. He doesn't try, when he's presented with these initial assertions of hate, to shut down the journalist. He doesn't do that at all. He leads with curiosity. He asks the journalist, he says, I'm curious. I'm just trying to understand your position. Describe to me what hate speech is. He allows the journalist to talk. Well, 2, he bottom lines things. He doesn't use excessive number of words. He's quite clear. He's direct. 3, the logical flow of his arguments is very, very straightforward. It's simple. It's easy to follow. And you can deduct that logic through that the journalist should have an answer there. 4, when he checkmates the journalist, he goes in for it. He says, this is absurd. And his tone changes to the point that he becomes more direct, more assertive in his tone. It commands more authority. And then he doesn't let that go. He keeps going for it with the journalist to prove the point until the journalist is the one that changes the topic. What does the journalist do that you should absolutely avoid in your communication style and techniques? 1, generalities. Don't use we think, they think, we spoke to people. Be specific. The more specific you are, the much more useful it is, much more effective it is. It comes across as you're more of a high agency communicator. 2, the journalist used too many words. He sounds like he's trying to cover something up. Brevity, succinctness, bottom lining, something that really, really important. 3, look at his body language and his tone. When he's presented with questions from Elon, I think colloquialisms, generalities, they're weak. They're weak language. They don't demonstrate gravitas. They don't demonstrate strength in position. They don't command authority. 4, when pushed on this particular point and he can't provide an example, he doesn't concede and reframe it in a way from a point of power. You always want to exploit in your debates, in your logical argument. If you're cornered, the question is, how can I exploit the position that I'm in to now flip it over onto the other side? I gave an example before how he could have done that. 5, always have examples. If you're going to make an assertion about something, make sure that you have examples to back it up. Useful. I really enjoyed watching this, and I really hope you can take some of these tools and techniques and to implement them in your communication to make you an effective communicator. Thanks so much.